Hello, my name's Ben Wilkes from Border Collie Trust in Staffordshire. Welcome to this presentation on a little bit about what Border Collie Trust do. But first, many people ask me, why just Border Collies? Well, that's a question I ask myself many times, but our history goes back to the 1970s and a lady called Hazel Monk, who had a particular love of Border Collies. And during a foot and mouth epidemic in the 1970s, she suddenly began to realise that there was a real issue about Border Collies needing support in respect of rescuing and rehoming. So she began to do some small-scale rehoming. And over the next 20 years or so, that grew up into quite a sizable organisation. That spread across the UK and involved homes, own homes, boarding kennels and such like. But there was always a desire to perhaps have a rescue centre. Unfortunately, Hazel passed away in the early 1990s and the mantle was taken on by a lady called Jenny Booth. And it was during that period that they were extremely fortunate enough to receive an incredibly generous donation, which allowed them to buy an old boarding kennels situated just outside Rugeley in Staffordshire. It was very old boarding kennels. It had sort of a flavour of the 1960s about it, I would suggest. I have some lovely pictures of the electricity junction box, which looked more like the London Underground than a proper electrical appliance. But there you go, that's another story. So in 1996, Border Collie Trust became a registered charity, and the following year, they were fortunate enough, as I said, to buy the premises. And it was around that time that I became involved myself, as someone who'd always owned dogs, always had a particular love of dogs. My mother used to breed Chihuahuas on a very small scale, and that was something that taught me a lot about dog ownership, especially as it was my job every evening as I got older to put the dogs to bed. Most of the time they didn't want to go to bed. So I learned some very valuable lessons about dog handling and how to overcome, shall we say, situations like that. So in 1997, my wife and I had lost our previous dogs and we were thinking of a new dog. And I'd been working in and around a rural area as a police officer, and I'd come across many Border Collies, and I thought, oh, that'll be a nice breed. They look easy, very intelligent, easy to train. Yeah, why not? So we got in touch with our local vet, who pointed us in the direction of Border Collie Trust. And that was one of those decisions in life. And I say this to many people, that sometimes you make a decision in your life that really is going to have an incredible effect on what happens next. And that was certainly the case with me. So we came along, we adopted a dog called Taffy, and he was our introduction to Border Collies. And that actually took place about 18 months before the rescue centre came into fruition. He was an incredible Border Collie. He was intelligent. He was easy to train, or so I thought, because looking back, I now realise that I didn't train him, he trained me. About 18 months after that, we saw an article in the local newspaper to say that Border Collie Trust had purchased this boarding kennels and needed some papers and blankets. And again, this was one of those moments in life where you make a decision that really is going to impact. And this was the second part of the decision making, if you like. And so I presented myself one day here at the rescue centre, suitably armed with newspapers, blankets and other goodies for the dogs. I was invited in. I was provided with a cup of coffee, and before I knew it, I'd signed up as a volunteer. And so began a period of about 3 years where I came during my off-duty times, walked dogs, helped at fundraising events, fetched dogs from Wales. At that point, we were travelling to Wales at least 3 times a week, 3 times a month, if not more. And coming back with many, many dogs. And I learned so much about rescue, things that I didn't even begin to understand or know. In 2000, I was invited to become a trustee. I had no idea what that involved, but again, I quickly found out. And then I retired from the police in 2001. And I was asked by the other trustees at the time, what are you going to do now you've retired? And I didn't have any great plans. So again, before I knew it, I was here Monday to Friday for several hours a day, helping with the admin, going off to fetch dogs again, and doing all that sort of stuff that needs to be done to run a rescue centre. Because whilst the dogs are the focus, there is so much more that has to be done, and that has grown incredibly over the years. I was talking to someone recently, and I would say that 20 years ago, 75% of my time was admin based. 25% of my time was actually doing things with the dogs or fetching dogs or something like that. I would say now that 99% of my time is dealing with admin. But there we go. I was hook, line and sinker. And then as the final, if you like, nail in the coffin, in 2003, Jenny Booth and her husband retired from Border Collie Trust, and we needed someone to live at the centre. And hey presto, I wonder who that would be. Well, yes, that was me and my wife. So for almost the last, it's coming up now to 20 years, I've been living here at the centre and working on a not always daily basis, but pretty much daily basis, doing things around Border Collie Trust. So that's a brief insight, a very brief insight into what we are and where we are. Prior to the pandemic, we were homing for about 400 dogs a year. I think our best was just over 500, I think, one year. That was an exceptional year. But generally speaking, it was around about the 400, 450. Since the pandemic, for lots of different reasons, that number has dropped slightly. It's now in the mid to high 300s. And that's been the focus. We spent a lot of time, particularly from about 2006 for about the next 5 or 6 years, carrying about an incredible amount of work here at the centre to turn it into the facilities that we've now got that bear no resemblance whatsoever to what was here in 1997. We have 13 staff at the moment, and people again are often surprised when rescue centres or rescue organisations have staff. We do have volunteers. I'm a volunteer myself in a way, but unfortunately, you can't run a rescue centre of this size, homing the number of dogs, looking after the number of dogs, purely on volunteers. So we do have paid staff who provide that care for the dogs. We generally have between 25 and 30 dogs at a time with us, and that's not our full capacity. But the one thing we've learned over the years is that if you run at capacity, particularly with dogs like Border Collies, you're going to have problems. Many dogs don't do well in kennels, we know that. So to give us the facility to be able to provide the level of care that we want to, in the way that we want to do it, we tend to run, as I said, at about 25 to 30. Recent events, which I'll come on to later, mean that at the moment we are in excess of that, and that's a concern, but that's a concern across rescue generally. The reasons collies come to us, well, as I said, many years ago we were travelling to Wales several times a month to fetch effectively stray dogs, the occasional relinquishments, but predominantly stray collies that had not been claimed. That has changed tremendously, and we don't see that many stray collies nowadays. It's changed tremendously. So most of the dogs coming to us from the UK tend to be relinquishments or dogs from other rescue centres who are struggling to home collies, don't like having collies at the rescue centre. We do also help a small number of rescues in Ireland. We've helped those traditionally for many years. And most of their dogs are still strays. Ireland still has a great stray dog problem. but that's the only ones we take from abroad, is from Southern Ireland. Now, the dogs come to us, as I said, for many reasons, and we all know, we've all seen reports and social media posts about why dogs end up in rescue centres, and collies are no different. And the reasons they come to us are many, many fold. Not coping with children, not coping with the big wide world, owners working longer hours, owners working shorter hours and can't afford the dog, can't afford the vet bills, which has grown incredibly, moving to rented property, which has become a big issue again over the last 20 years, with more and more people renting. They're finding it harder to find a property that will allow them to take a rescue dog. And bereavements and ill health, and so on. We've had 3 dogs on welfare stays with us over the last 3 or 4 weeks due to the owners being taken ill, taken into hospital, and nobody to care for the dog. So we do try to help in that respect, particularly if it's one of our dogs that we've rehomed to someone. The problems with collies, though, is much deeper than that. And recent news reports, and I'm sure you've seen them, particularly on social media, but maybe on local radio and on television, have highlighted the difficulties that rescue centres are finding at present. All of the colleagues that I speak to throughout the Association of Dogs and Cats Owners and further afield are all reporting that the pressures they are under are, I wouldn't say unprecedented, that's a word that gets bandied a lot. They've certainly increased tremendously over the last 3 years. And in some ways, as far as I can see, they've certainly changed over the last 20 years. And we are seeing a constant bombardment, if you like, of requests to rehome dogs. Now, unfortunately, what is also a problem is that many of those dogs have some quite serious behavioural issues that are almost going to be impossible to rehome. To find someone with the expertise, with the desire, with the patience, with the time to take on a border collie who has some quite serious behavioural difficulties is nigh on impossible nowadays. We used to see this 20 years ago. People would come and say, "Oh, I don't mind that the collies nip somebody because that's what collies do. Yeah, that's fine. I can cope with that." Now it seems everybody wants that perfect collie that isn't going to nip, that isn't going to chase traffic. And I'm afraid that's very, very difficult to find. So we are being, like most rescues, being inundated with requests to rehome dogs that are not going to be easy to rehome. We're also seeing many dogs with medical issues that are either not being seen, not diagnosed, ignored, perhaps on rare occasions, but also because the owner simply can't afford it. And that's, as I said earlier, is one of the reasons why some of the dogs are relinquished to us. Everything about this current crisis, if you like, and I think we do have to refer to it as a bit of a crisis, is blamed on the pandemic and on lack of socialisation, on people returning to work, and all those reasons that we see offered. And whilst I'm not going to say that that isn't true, I'm sure there is an element of that. I do think there's other greater things that are going on. And part of the problem we see with many collies is to do with their breeding, is to do with their genetics. And if you think about it, many of the collies that people buy, particularly from farms, are bred usually for a specific purpose. So the farmer will have a very good working dog. He might have a male and a female, or he might go to another local farmer who has one of the opposite sex that's good, because what he wants is to carry on that line. Now, those dogs are being bred for specific purposes. They're not being bred to cope in a normal domestic home with carpet, with microwave ovens going ping, with phones ringing, with music, with television, with people running about, with people shouting and screaming, with people talking, with people coming and going at odd times. They're bred to carry out a simple task. And when they've carried out that simple task, to then have time to chill out. And many of the collies that we see are just struggling in our world. One of my own collies many years ago that I had was agoraphobic. I've had ones that, you know, have had the usual chasing, ones that don't like children, and all those sort of things. But what we do have to remember is these dogs that are being bred, particularly in farming type environments, are not being bred for the domestic home. Now, that doesn't mean to say that all of them will not settle, will not cope in a domestic home. Two of mine, I know, have come from a background of farming type environment. So we can't say that, oh yes, those particular dogs don't have one from that particular environment because it won't cope. You could just as easily have one from a domestic type environment where they've had a litter of pups that could not cope either. It's hit and miss. You just don't know. It's a pup. It doesn't really show any issues or any problems. And just like a child, those things develop as time goes on. And I think that's what catches many people out. They have a collie, they have it as a pup, all seems wonderful. And then gradually at about 6 months or 8 months or 10 months or whatever age it is, problems start to develop and many people just don't know what to do. And so they turn to the internet, they turn to social media, they turn to a book, they turn to Fred down the pub and ask him what he thinks they should do. And they're usually told, oh, your dog's not getting enough exercise. You need to exercise it more, needs more exercise. So they give it more exercise. What they don't realize is that this dog is already overstimulated to some degree by what's going on in the home. Its adrenaline is coursing through its veins. It's producing chemicals that make it difficult for the dog to work out what it should and shouldn't be doing, to make genuine decisions in the way that dogs may make or may not make decisions. And so we give it more exercise and we take it down the park and we throw a ball for hours on end. And then we go home and we say, right, Bill, Fred, George, Mabel, lie down now because you've had lots of exercise and the dog's on a high. It's had that blue smarty effect and it wants more. And you get frustrated and you think, what's going on? So you ask Fred again down the pub or on social media. And he says, you're not doing enough. You're still not doing enough. You need to give it more. And so you give it more exercise. And so the cycle carries on and the behaviors develop and the behaviors get worse. And then you turn to a rescue centre and you say, I've got this dog that's causing all these problems and I can't cope with it. And now somehow we have to try and see if there's a way that we can find a home for a dog like that that is going to cope better. So the one thing I spend a lot of time doing is speaking to people about their collie that they've adopted, that they've had from a pup. And I can honestly say that in 25 years of speaking to people about border collies, dealing with border collies, I don't think I have ever said to someone, you are not doing enough with your border collie. What I do say on a regular basis is actually, I think you're doing too much, or you're doing too much inappropriate exercise, for example, throwing a ball for hours on end, and you're not giving the dog the time to chill out. My own border collie, who I've just looked around, who I've had just over 12 months now, she's deaf. She has some wonderful little genetic traits. That means she can be very, very easily overstimulated, almost at the flick of a switch. And we've recognized the situations where that happens. So what we do is, we allow her to have those fun times and act a little mad, but then we make sure that regularly throughout the day, she has time where she can relax, chill out, and let that adrenaline just settle down a bit. If you think about a working dog is not out in a field chasing sheep endlessly for hours on end, every day, 7 days a week. Farmers don't move their sheep every day. When they do it, it's under control. The shepherd is calm, he's using his voice and his signals. The dog is reacting to that. But apart from that initial outrun that they do, as we've seen on the telly, much of what they do is at walking pace, but they're using this, they're using the brain. And as all of us know, you can be easily as tired if you had a hard day on the computer, hard day at work, mentally. That is just as tiring as a hard day physically. So it has to be a combination of physical exercise, mental stimulation, but also, most importantly of all, and I can't stress this enough, time to relax and time to chill out. That's pretty much all I wanted to say really about what we do and Border Collies. I hope it's been found of some interest. We are still rehoming and we are still looking for new owners actively. The process has changed over the years. Pandemic brought many new features to the way we work. Some are much better, some make it a little bit harder, but we are trying, we are evolving, we are changing. As an aside, we have, after years of getting the centre how we wanted it and thinking this is great, we've got a lovely setup now, and then we were suddenly hit with the bombshell or the train track that is HS2. And some of you may have known the story. If you want to spend 10 minutes or so, make yourself a cup of coffee, go onto our website and have a look at the story as it evolved, because it is quite a read, it is quite incredible. The bottom line is that after 7 years, almost 8 years of negotiations, we got nowhere with HS2. They refused to help us relocate, although they're taking a proportion of our exercise paddock that makes it impossible to use, or will make it impossible to use. We'll have a road running right next to us. Next to that will be the train track. So we've had to take matters into our own hand, and very recently, only within the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've been able to, again, thanks to the incredible generosity of donors and supporters over the years, and the hard work of the trust in making sure we were able to do this, we had funds set aside that have enabled us to buy a 6-acre field right opposite where we are. So hopefully our future is protected in that we will have somewhere to walk the dogs. That's me, that's Border Collie Trust. If anybody wants to know any more, please do get in touch. You can find us on our website, which is bordercollietrustgb.org.uk. We're on all the social media channels, and you can find me in our office most Mondays to Fridays, 9 till about 1. I'm usually there, but you can get me by email as well. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy all the rest of the presentations. I'm sure it's going to be, it will be a fantastic session. And thank you once again for the invite. Cheerio.